Hello and welcome to another edition of Apple a Day. In today's episode, I'm going to show you everything you need to know about the Display Dialog command in AppleScript. So let's get started. I've already got an empty script editor window open. We're going to start with the basics by typing in Display Dialog Hello World. Now you can run this right away, or you can press the hammer icon up here, which actually compiles it first. Sometimes there's a need to compile first, but usually you're okay just to simply run the script. You can run that by pressing Command R or pressing the play button. So by running that script, it displays a very simple dialog window with the text that we specified, Hello World, and with the default cancel and OK buttons. So if I press OK, and you look at the results, you can see down here, it shows you the button that was selected, which in this case was OK. What is actually returned is a record of the properties, and a record can contain more than one value. And shortly, you're going to see a need for more than one value being returned. So let's say we want to be able to handle the results of the display dialog window. You can either store this record down here, you can store this record into a variable, which you can then access later, or you can dig down into the results in a single line. And the way you do that, at the beginning of the display dialog command, you can type in if button returned, and that button returned, this button returned that I just typed in corresponds to this button returned right here. And this is a record. So if button returned of, and we're going to put an opening bracket, and we're going to wrap this whole statement in brackets, display dialog hello world, and then we're going to close the bracket there. That's just Shift 9 and Shift 0, standard round brackets. So this statement now says if button returned of the display dialog statement is equal to OK. So we're testing if the button returned is equal to OK of the display dialog command. And with each if statement, you have to have the word then at the end. So like if something, then do this. And hit return. And if this statement is true, then we're going to execute this line of code, which is just going to be another display dialog command. Display dialog, OK, pressed. Now you can have more than one line of code here. And to tell the script editor when you're finished the if statement, like in other words, when you're finished executing lines of code, if the if statement is true, you have to tell it when you're done. And you do that with the end if command. Now I'm going to compile this first. The nice thing about AppleScript is when you do compile it, it formats the text and makes it a little bit easier to read. You can see that if the button return of the display dialog hello world statement is OK, then we're going to display another dialog that says OK was pressed. So let's run this. Press OK. OK pressed. So there you go. We did our first if statement using the results of a display dialog command. Now another way you can do this is to assign the results of the display dialog statement into a variable. So you can type set, and then I'm just going to make my variable name called the result to, and I'm going to get rid of this part because we're not doing a test in this line anymore. It's just doing set the result to display dialog hello world. And then we're just going to return the value of the result when we're finished. So I'm going to play this, press OK, and there you go, button returned, OK. So the result contains this record now. And then what you can do is you can say if button returned of the result is equal to OK, then display dialog OK pressed. And if. So the word of in AppleScript is used to identify that I'm looking at something within a record. So the property name is right here. Property name is called button returned, and it's inside a record. And a record, again, can be multiple values stored inside these brace brackets. So button returned of the result, and this is the result, and there's only one value in it. So button returned of the result, and it does have the value OK. So this should be a true statement then. If button returned of the result equals OK, then display this message. So let's run it. Hello world, press OK. OK is pressed. We know it worked. If I just put in another letter in here, just to make sure that there's not something else wrong that we might have done, we know this is not true. Hit play, press OK, and nothing happens. So we know that statement is working properly. So those two versions of the code do the exact same thing. Whether you're doing the if statement in line with the display dialog, or you store the results of the display dialog to a separate variable and then test that variable's value. Both ways work, both ways are good. The only time you would really want to store the results into a variable would be as if you're getting more than one result back, or if you know you need to check that value later on. So let's move on. I'm going to just highlight everything and delete it. And the next thing I want to show you is how to enter in text into your display dialog and then store off the value of that text. So let's start with, what is your name? So display dialog, what is your name? Question mark. And in order to display a text field that will allow you to input data, you have to add default answer. Now you can type in anything for your default answer, but we just want it to be blank, so we'll just type in shift quote quote. So if we run this, there you go, you get a dialog box that says, what is your name? I'll just type in John. I press OK, and here's where we get multiple values returned. So you see in the bottom under the result, we've got button returned, which is OK, and then we have text returned, which is the contents of the text field in the display dialog window. So this is a good reason to store off the value of the results of the display dialog window. So let's do that right now. We'll type in set the result to, now sometimes you need to put the display dialog portion in brackets, especially if you have this within an if statement. Sometimes you don't, sometimes it'll work either way. But just for the sake of consistency, we're going to put this in brackets. If we compile it, everything looks fine. And if I run this, type in John, and again, it spits back a record, which is now stored in the variable, the result. And of course, that record has multiple values, the value of the button and the value of the text entered. So following this, I'm going to add a new line. I'm going to type in if button returned of the result is equal to OK. Then I want to display the name that I typed in. So we can do display dialog, shift quote, hello with a space. In AppleScript, you have to use the ampersand to append two strings or two text blocks together. Most other programming languages would just use the plus sign, but in AppleScript, you have to use the and symbol. So we type in hello inside quotes, and I need a space there, otherwise it'll bump whatever text is that I'm adding after the hello portion right against it. So you want that space, and I'm going to put a bracket, type in text returned of the result. The result, remember, is the variable that's containing the record, which was returned by display dialog. And then after this, we're going to add an exclamation mark. So I'll just put the and symbol again, quote, exclamation mark, quote. Hit return, and we have to close that if statement, remember. And close it with an end if. Let's compile this first to take a quick look. Oops, got an error. Oh, I see what I did wrong. I forgot a closing quote after this OK text. There we go. So now that it's formatted, you can read it a little bit easier. So let's run this. I'll type in John, press return, and hello, John. So we know it's working. So we're doing two things here. We're storing off the value of the button and the value of the text that was entered in. We're able to test against the value of that button, and then we're able to display the value of that text. So welcome to programming. Even though this is a short script, it's still running some commands and a basic if statement. That's programming. Now let's modify the second display dialog and ask for a password. So after the exclamation mark, let's type in, please enter your password. And then in order to have yet another field available, we have to type in default answer, followed by two quotes for blank. But we want this to be a password field, meaning that we want it to be hidden. Well, there's a built-in parameter for that, for the display dialog command in AppleScript, and that is called hidden answer. So we'll type in hidden answer true. Now, what's going to happen here, you'll notice something interesting. As soon as I compile this, it's going to change that text to say hidden answer true, which is certainly valid, but it's going to change it to be more readable from an English standpoint. So it'll say with hidden answer. So if I hit compile, and it changes it to with hidden answer. Both are valid. Obviously, when the script is compiled, AppleScript prefers this format, so it could have actually typed in with hidden answer instead of hidden answer true. So let's run this. Type in my name. Hello, John, please enter your password. And as soon as I start typing a password, it uses the bullets. So it's using the hidden value. If I press OK, you should see the results of that. So it shows you the results of that dialog. You can see that I selected OK and that the password I typed in was actually password, which is not recommended for using as a password. So of course you can then store the results of the second dialog into another variable and then use the results of the first dialog as well as the second dialog to save off the username and password somewhere else, whether it's in a file or some other application that you might be communicating with. But let's move on. The next thing I want to go over is customizing the buttons. So let's clear this out and start over. Now, the maximum number of buttons that you can have in a display dialog is 3. And by default, you have 2. You have the cancel and OK. And most of the time, that's all you will ever need. But sometimes you might want the text in the buttons to be different, or you may even have the need for a third button. So let's do an example that uses 3 buttons. I'm going to start with Display Dialog. What is your age? And then to customize the buttons, you put in the buttons parameter, and that's followed by a record of text items. And a record, as I already mentioned before, starts with a brace bracket, and which is the shift square bracket right next to the letter P, and that gives you the brace bracket. So I will type in my first button, which I want to be not applicable, and then a comma, and then I can do my second button, which is going to be cancel, and my third button, which is check age. And then you have to close that record with another brace bracket. So that's shift and the closing square bracket, which of course is right next to the opening bracket. So if I run this, you'll see the 3 buttons there: not applicable, cancel, and check age. Now notice there's no default button. There's no highlighted blue button there. So if I press return, it's not going to do anything. However, the cancel button is recognized simply because it recognizes the word cancel. So that has built-in functionality. So if I could press Command period to cancel, it should recognize that, and it does. And in fact, it tells me down here that the user canceled. One thing I did forget to add was default answer. And I'll just leave it blank. Now there are also additional parameters that help you identify the default button as well as the cancel button. So after default answer, quote, quote, I'm going to type in default button, and the buttons are numbered starting at the number 1. So I'm going to type in default button 3, which should apply to the third button, which is check age. So if I run this, now we get a dialog box that says, what is your age? I can type in the age, and notice what happened. As soon as it recognized that we have a cancel and a default button, it formats the positions of the buttons automatically to put the third button on the far left and the 2 standard buttons, cancel and the default button, on the right. And of course, notice that the default button also is highlighted in blue, which means that should correspond to the return key on the keyboard. So if I type in a value, say 50, and hit return, it closes the window, and you can see the results at the bottom: button returned, check age, and text returned 50. Now let's change the cancel button to say stop. So that should prevent the built-in functionality from recognizing that second button as a cancel button. So command period should no longer work. So let's run this. And there it says stop right here. So if I press command period, it shouldn't do anything. And if I press stop, it actually tells you that the button returned was stop. It doesn't say the user canceled anymore. Now, let's say I still want that stop button to act like a cancel button. Well, you can do that with another optional parameter called cancel button. Cancel button 2. So I'm going to run this, And now it formats it again. When we just ran this a second ago before adding the cancel button identifier, the button formatting was lost. In other words, it put all the buttons shifted over to the right-hand side. I still had my default button, but it didn't recognize that stop was the cancel button. But as soon as I tell it that the cancel button is number 2, then it put the stop and check age button on the right-hand side and the third button, the not applicable button, on the left-hand side. So if I press stop now, or sorry, if I type in command period now, it should recognize that the stop button is the cancel button, and it actually won't store that button into the record. It'll instead tell me that the user canceled. And there you have it. It's an error, the user canceled. If you need your code to check if the cancel button was pressed without kicking out of your program, you can do that using the try statement. And that's just enclosing the display dialog within a try command. And the try statement has another command built in called onError. So we want to display a window that says cancel pressed in the event the user does indeed press cancel. So let's compile this. So if there's any kind of an error between this try statement and the onError statement, any error within this area, now you can have more than one statement inside of a try block, but in this example, of course, there's only the one line. There are many ways you can generate an error in code. One, of course, is by pressing cancel, and AppleScript treats that as an error. But instead of kicking out of our script, we're now going to display another window saying cancel pressed. And then just to show that the script keeps running, we'll do this. So what will happen is we'll press cancel. That's going to be an error. And then we'll run this statement, which will display this dialog, which says cancel pressed. And then rather than kicking out of the script, it'll just jump past the end try and run this line, which displays another dialog that just says continuing. Now, if I had multiple lines of code in here, like if I had some extra lines right here, what would happen is it would hit this first line, the user presses cancel, these lines of code that would be here would be ignored. And instead, it would jump down to the onError because it detected an error, and it would run this statement in the event of an error, and that would finish the try block of code, and it would jump down after the end try and continue executing code, which would be this line right here. So let's prove that and press play. So I'm just going to press stop, which is the cancel button, and it says cancel pressed. And if I hit OK, it says continuing. Now, of course, if I were to run this again, press stop, and then press cancel now, it's going to kick out. It says user canceled. You can eliminate that from happening by doing this. You can just have a single button. If you don't want to give the user an option to cancel at any point, you can just do buttons, OK, and then default button 1. So if I run this, it's going to ask me my age again. I'm going to hit stop. And as far as AppleScript is concerned, pressing cancel is an error. So it jumps down to onError and runs the code inside that, which is displaying this dialog, which does not have a cancel button, just has the OK button. If I press return from there, it just moves on past the end try, which is, of course, displaying yet another dialog. OK, I'm just going to lose this. Now, next, we want to store the value of that button returned into a variable. But instead of storing the entire record, we're actually just going to store the button itself. So we'll do set the result to button return of, and then we'll put this entire statement in brackets. And if I press compile, make sure that works. That looks pretty good. So then I can just say if the result is equal to, say, not applicable, then display dialog age skipped, and if. Okay, so what I did here, I took the display dialog statement. The result again is a record, but instead of setting the result to that record, I just plucked out the one property in that record that we want, which is the button returned. So the result variable should just contain text. So subsequently, I don't have to check if button returned of the result is equal to, I can just say if the result is equal to not applicable, and then we're going to display yet another dialog. So let's run this. So if I hit stop, it should tell me cancel pressed. Run it again. If I press check age, nothing should happen because we're not doing anything if the user does choose check age. Let's run a third time, and we'll click on not applicable, and it tells us age skipped, which is great. So setting the value of the button returned to a variable is very handy, because then I can also compare the result to check age and do whatever code that I need to do there. I don't have to check for stop, because stop is identified as a cancel button, and the on error tells us that I hit stop. I should change cancel to stop. So now you have a lot more control over some of the basic functionality of the display dialog window. You can put in text, you have multiple buttons that you can choose, you have more control over the buttons that appear, and you can also add a title to the window using the title parameter. So we'll just continue with this example, and after the cancel button 2 and before that bracket, we'll type in with title age verification. So if I run this, we see that the window has a title, age verification. Let's add a title to these other display dialogs too. We'll add with title user response, and we'll do the same thing here with title user response. So if I hit stop, I get a user response title inside the stop press dialog, and I run it again. I'll click on not applicable, and again I get the user response title in that window as well. Oh, that's interesting. So if I click on not applicable, I hit cancel just now and it brought up the window that said stop pressed. So because I didn't add the default 1 button to this dialog, it still shows cancel. Now cancel, this dialog is still displayed within this try and on error block, right? It's still inside that. So if I press cancel, that's an error, and it says stop pressed because it recognized this as an error and jumped down to this display dialog statement here. That's not an issue at all, but it's kind of weird to have a cancel button when it's just a statement. So let's put buttons, okay, oops. So now, if I hit run, not applicable, age skipped, okay. But I didn't put default button. So let's add that too. And now I can just hit return. You can also add icons to these dialogues. There are 3 that are built in. There's the note, the stop, and the caution. Let's put the note icon along with the very first dialogue. So at the end of the script, before that bracket, let's type in with icon note. I'm going to run that. And what happens is it displays the application icon in your dialog window. Now, because we're running AppleScript, it's displaying the AppleScript icon. But that certainly dresses up the window, doesn't it? So now let's add another icon to the age skipped display dialog. And we'll type in with icon caution. Run that. Age skipped, it's my user response window. You'll see it's displaying the system caution icon, which is just a yellow triangle with an exclamation mark. And then on the bottom right of that icon, it displays the application icon, which of course is the AppleScript icon. Let's do one more icon in the stop pressed dialog with icon, and we'll just use the stop icon. We'll run that, press stop. Oh, I put it in quotes. Yeah, that doesn't need to be in quotes. It's just stop. Yeah, because if it's in quotes, it's considered text, but the actual identifier, it recognizes that as a command. So icon stop. So we'll hit stop. And there's the stop icon, again, the system stop icon, accompanied by whatever the running applications icon is. Now, only those 3 icons are built in. However, you can use custom icons stored in an ICNS file. In an upcoming tutorial, I'll show you how to use custom icons, as well as to change the icons in your AppleScript application. So instead of seeing that script editor icon to identify your application, you can have your own custom icon. Okay, so the very last parameter that's available is a timeout. And at the very end of that first display dialog, before that bracket, we'll type in giving up after and the number of seconds. Let's keep this short just for the sake of testing. Obviously, you don't want to give up after just 2 seconds, but like I said, let's just keep it short. I'm going to hit play. And you can see the window closed after 2 seconds. And there's no result. Doesn't look like anything happened. Let's run that one more time. Play. It's waiting. It waits for 2 seconds because I specified 2 seconds, and it just closes. So what does that mean? When the dialog closes, no button was returned. So the result should be set to blank. So what I can do is after this if statement, I'm going to type in else if the result is equal to quote, quote, then we'll add another display dialog. User too slow with title, user response, default button 1 with icon caution. Now, I'm going to compile this. This is another sub command of the if statement. So you've got if, then, and then it executes code. If this is not true, it goes down to the next statement, which is else if. So if this is not true, it then checks another condition. So if the result being equal to not applicable is not true, then it checks the else if statement, which is the result is equal to blank. And if that's true, it runs this dialog. We can have many unlimited else if statements if we want. So if we were checking for the check age button, we would do that after this and say else if the result equals check age, then do whatever we want to do with that age. But I'm going to run this, and you should see this dialog appear after 2 seconds because this window will close because it's giving up after 2 seconds. And there you go, user too slow. Oh, and again, I'm going to run that. Because I left the cancel button in there, if I hit cancel, what did I do? Oh, you know what? I put default button 1. Ah, that's right. So default button 1, so default button 1, cancel is my default button because I didn't put buttons in there. So it has cancel and OK, but I set my cancel button to be the default. So that's kind of goofy. Let me just hit OK there. Let's take that out. Run it again. Wait for the 2 seconds. If I hit cancel here, again, cancel is inside this try block. So I should get the stop pressed dialog after I press cancel because it's going to recognize that as an error. And there it is, stop pressed. All right. Well, that's everything I wanted to cover today for display dialog. I hope this helps you put in some more polished interactivity in your AppleScripts. The display dialog can be very powerful. Obviously, you're limited to the number of fields that you can have on the screen, but for simple little projects, for simple little scripts, it can be very helpful. Okay, well, that's it for display dialog. Watch for an upcoming video, which will go more in depth into customizing the icons in display dialog. If you have any questions or suggestions for more tutorials, please add them to the comments. Thanks as always for watching. I'm John Martins. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time on Apple a Day.